Previously on Quick Play.
But there's a lot of really great games on the 3DS that, due to the nature of that hardware, will never really be able to come forward because of the way that those two screens work together.
Xbox and PlayStation kind of accidentally made it easy for them to just have long-term games just be available. A defense for Nintendo from early on is like, because that whole digital storefront is relatively recent, like within the last 10 years, like, they never had to consider that.
Unless something radical happens to the market, I think that in some ways, most Nintendo hardware, if not all Nintendo hardware going forward, will be somewhat iterative. It's just kind of an interesting thing, is like, you know, was all that innovation worth it? Anyways, it's just kind of like one of those things. But you say you had pushback, so I want to hear more of this aforementioned pushback.
Part of that was like they didn't know any better when they were younger. Kind of course, they weren't thinking of like the digital storefront future when they were making, I don't know.
Dude, I mean, honestly,
Leapy agents.
Up until like 5 years ago, I don't think any of us really thought, like, we were like, oh, digital, like, that's cool. Like, that's a convenient option. And I think like all of a sudden it's like, well, no, this is probably, unfortunately, like the inevitable future in some ways.
Yeah. The other piece of it is thinking of like, when we talk about Nintendo's innovation, our minds like so quickly go to like the hardware stuff where it's like the waggle controls, the dual screens of the DS, the Virtual Boy, like kind of these big out of left field swings, like making Labo being like a cardboard kit sort of thing.
Yeah, that was unhinged. Like that was just so insane.
And a lot of this stuff is like, what were they thinking? And it kind of gets lost to time. It becomes this lost media, but it's also like, I mean, well, it's lost media because no one really cared. At the same time, I think Nintendo's innovation comes a lot more in its gameplay, and its most like beloved stuff is often pretty conventional, and like conventional in the aspect of, well, they kind of set the standard, like thinking of like the original Super Mario Brothers and Ocarina of Time. Like both of those were very innovative and kind of, but also looking back, like through the history of video games from video games to 1970 is like, that's a pretty standard. You're using buttons on a controller to control something on a screen. Like it's not you're swinging around a white TV remote to play tennis. Like it's very normal video games. And like, that's also like very unfair to call them that, because they are very innovative games and like if hugely innovative gameplay. I think a lot of those, it's not often these unique gameplay mechanics get stranded because of some hardware limitation that was an innovation at the time. Like Mario Galaxy, really well beloved. Like that game came to Switch where they just put the spin move on the Y button instead of shaking. You could still shake the controller too. But Ocarina of Time even came to 3DS, and they had to remap the buttons from the C button, like all the C buttons, to make it make more sense. But these games that are The World Ends With You is a good example of how that doesn't always translate, but it's like 95% of the time they're bringing these games forward, but also making them like the kind of the definitive way to play them now, because no one wanted to shake the controller to make Donkey Kong blow down a dandelion, but now there's a button for it in HD returns, whatever.
Well, and it's funny that you mention the 3DS version of Ocarina or Majora's Mask, which I think in some ways, I think both of them are sort of, but they are probably the optimal way to play those games. Full disclosure, I tried to replay Majora's Mask a few years ago, and I just think that game has, like, that used to be like my favorite Legend of Zelda.
Yeah.
I think it's aged like milk.
Yeah.
Like, not well.
I've started it multiple times in my life. I actually played it through the first time like 3 years ago, and it was maddening of like, this is an incredible idea that's just hampered by the most annoying mechanics you could possibly imagine. And I'm sure like the 3DS version, I'm sure fixes a ton of that.
Some of it. I mean,
Okay.
but like even there, it's like when they brought Ocarina Time forward on the Switch, it's not the 3DS version, which is
Right.
it's basically just sort of a ROM hack, or not
Yeah.
hack, but it's like a ROM of the 64
Yeah.
version, which I'm like, ugh, even that, like, but I think it's just, I think it's at least at the very least, I think it's an interesting reflection on just how fickle this industry really is that there has been like, so if you want to look at like the hardware or the gameplay, so much stuff just really just gets left on the cutting room floor or just kind of gets
Mm-hmm.
left in the past because it, and the stuff that frankly like doesn't really make it, like, the fact
True.
is like the DS is not like the future of handheld gaming.
Right.
Why? Because we have the Switch, and the Switch I think has really, I think honestly, like the Switch, which in some ways is a much more subtle move forward. I think the
Yeah.
Switch, we talk about the innovation of Nintendo. I think the Switch, more than anything, single-handedly is going to define console gaming moving forward. I think it already has
Yeah.
sort of like with the emergence of Steam Deck and like the
Right.
the the handheld gaming laptops and stuff like that. Again, the rumors that Sony and Xbox are both looking at that. You have the PlayStation Portal already as sort of like a weird hybrid streaming kind of solution. Like you have this stuff. It's and like I think I've told you, you and I have talked about lots of things. Handheld
Sure.
gaming is probably my favorite way to play.
Yeah.
Um,
It is for me now. Like it
it,
used to not be, but now that I have a toddler and we'll soon have two, and now it's like, well, I'm done. At the end of the day, I want to play my games lying in bed, and my Steam Deck, my Switch are perfect for that.
yeah, yeah. And I just think like even, yeah. So man, but so all of that, I think, like I said, sort of like, I know I kind of like, this is unfortunately like my brain is a scary, scary place, and your audience is experiencing that. But I think
It's an
all,
innovative place, Nate.
innovation, but it's just kind of like it's an interesting reflection on just sort of again the trajectory of this industry and just sort of how it
Yeah.
moves, and like there is all this stuff like and you can sort of see traces of it and touches of it all through. And I mean, sometimes I think Nintendo just innovated. Well, I mean, like okay, like the GameCube, which is a console
Yeah.
that I love. I still have a ton of affection for that system, but like
Yeah.
they they went with the mini discs because they didn't want to pay licensing fees for like Blu-ray or DVD or something like
Right.
that. And
Yeah.
it's just like sometimes the innovation is just like it's like you're cutting your nose off to spite your own face kind of thing.
Right.
And it still works or whatever, but it's just funny. And like I said, I don't think this is a problem that's unique to Nintendo. I think sort of a lot of gaming history is probably like if we really were to like do a deep dive and comb through, there's probably like tons of stuff in like the graveyard that we could sort
Right.
of like comb through, like weird in like hardware innovations or just weird games or
Yeah.
whatever. But and it I guess sort of too like it's like it eventually it all kind of like gets a little safe, a little
Yeah.
like you find sort of like the happy medium. Um,
Right.
which,
In some way, like Switch almost feels like that, where it's because it's like this kind of either they set the trend or they saw the trend just before it was about to happen and hopped on that wave at the right time. But it's like, yeah, of course, looking back, it was kind of the obvious way to go forward of like, yeah, let's combine home console and portable gaming. And
but
it's like, that's a great next step.
I mean, it was, but it wasn't. Like nobody saw that coming. Like let's just like full. Like nobody was like the Switch thing. We kept hearing about it, and then when you finally see it, you're like, oh, these mad lads. They have actually like they've cracked the code. They've done it. Um,
But it did feel like this was what they wanted the Wii U to be, but they were
yeah,
limited by the technology of their time. Like,
yeah,
and now they've cracked this is what they were hoping for, and now they can actually pull it off.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's like these forgotten technologies, they stumble and they falter and they struggle, so that we have things like the Switch and moving forward the Switch 2. I guess like it's one of those things where, like I said, it's kind of just an interesting sort of examination and thought exercise where I don't really like, I just think it's funny. And I guess sort of even like one of the things you put in the notes I did say is they're like going forward the Switch 2. It's like, I hope that it's not too weird, but I hope it's a little weird.
Sure.
Like surprise me, delight me a little bit, but don't get too far outside of the realm of like, this is a thing that will, like, the whole thing with like the mouse functionality for the new Joy-Cons. I'm like, actually, that's kind of brilliant. That makes porting over, like, it makes bringing stuff from PC over to Switch 2 a lot easier, so, and they're going to do some like weird, like gimmicky game where they use it in a way that nobody ever saw coming.
Mario Paint 2. That's what they gotta bring
dude,
it back. That's what they gotta do.
I have heard that so many times, and I'll tell you what, like,
it's
if they don't, I will be sad panda, because I'm like, that would be so much fun. I remember I had cousins who had Mario Paint. Yeah, that's a great one too. Just the Mario Paint like mouse pad thing,
SNES mouse.
Yeah, it's like that was such a cool thing that never got used for anything else, I think.
That's true. But what I'm hoping for too is like, even if the hardware of Switch 2 doesn't feel like this big left turn in a way that's safe, and that's kind of also in its own way, like we were talking about, that is a little bit relieving. I do hope the games are innovative themselves too. Like I think a lot of Switch 1 games for that series has been like the best version of the game so far. Like Smash Bros. Ultimate, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the best it could be. And now they're at the spot where a lot of these, like, well, what did they do next? Is the big left turn is within each game franchise themselves.
Yeah. And I think like that's the one thing that you can say about Nintendo. Like, I don't play my Switch as much as a lot of other people, just because I have sort of become a bit of a performance snob. Like, I want steady frame rates. I want, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But so I'm excited about having more juice, but I do think there is a spark to Nintendo that, just as far as like especially the first party design philosophy, that I don't think we're going to have to worry about that. And I know that, and again, it's something Micah brought up in that, again, the brain trust bite size was like, just, there's a lot of people that are going to be, like when there was that list of like 6 or 7 guys that like Miyamoto and a lot of the people who are steering the ship at Nintendo now, like they are in their 60s and 70s, but the sort of the beauty of it is that I really do think like they have such a strong, like a healthy cultural identity at Nintendo, that that sort of like creativity is really, it's going to be really hard to scrub that out. And so I think a lot of the people, like, even looking at something like Super Mario Wonder, which was in some ways a reinvention of the 2D side scrolling Mario games, that was, it was in some ways a complete departure, but also not. And Nintendo manages to do that. So like, I think in sort of what you're like, I think we have reason to be optimistic.
Yeah. And like my understanding is I think the Splatoon team is like a younger generation of Nintendo developers. And like, that's kind of what they're coming up with, where it's got this unique style, but it's also just this Nintendo fun philosophy where it's a twist with just one really good mechanic that is then just riffed off and expanded out from there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's hope. But
I think Nintendo, Yeah. Yeah. I think we're in a good place. I just, like I said, I just don't want them to get too weird. Like, get a little weird. Like, delight me, shock me even. Just don't make it too alienating.
Yeah. Let's go with maybe some like San Antonio and not quite Austin. Is that what we're going with here?
Maybe. I'm not a Texan, like, Josh, you would have to ask Josh about that. I'm just like, just make it a little weird,
Just a little weird.
Yeah. You put some cocoa powder in that chili.
There you go. Oh no. Oh, that's a Midwest take. You can't be doing that.
Listen, it's like the only good thing to come out of Ohio, man. Besides some of our friends.
And my dad. I've got some Ohioan blood, so
well, I mean, I would include that. I don't know your dad, but I would include that. So
he's a very nice man.
Yeah, I'm sure he is.
Love my dad.
he can't help his birthplace.
Well, I think since we've referenced Skyline Chili, it's probably time to wrap up here. But Nate, as you like to say on Backlog Breakdown, the final form, but what are you playing?
Right now, not a whole lot. I actually fired up Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake, and I was like around on that for a little bit today.
Yeah. Apparently there's like high likelihood rumors of 3 and 4.
I think it's all but confirmed. And that's actually, I kind of heard like talk about that, and I was like, oh, I have that. I'm going to play that.
Mm-hmm.
So I played that today.
Nice. Good stuff.
It's a good time.
Good. I am kind of between games, but I finally finished up Tales of Kenzera Zao. Nice little Metroidvania. I enjoyed my time there. Well, Nate, thank you for joining me. Where else are you out on the internet?
I mean, I'm in all sort of like the usual spaces, like the Twitter /X, Facebook, all that stuff. Nate _McKeever. I gotta be on like the Backlog Breakdowns Discord server. I am not big into social media these days. I think
you're better for it. It's good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I have thoughts, but I'll keep them to myself. But yeah, so there's not much, but yeah, if you want to, the best place to get a hold of me is like honestly on Discord in the Breakdown server. So
there you go. I hang out there too. I usually lurk. I sometimes say stuff or make a dumb joke.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
And I'll link that bite-sized, not so bite-sized brain trust episode too that we've been referencing kind of throughout.
It's beefy, folks, and I apologize in advance if you actually listen to the whole thing.
No, it's good stuff. I enjoyed my time with it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening in. You can follow us on the major podcasting services or out on YouTube, and you can press all those good buttons if you enjoyed this conversation. You can also find us on the proper socials at Quick Play Pod, and let us know, is there a stranded Nintendo game that you wish would come back? That's all the time we have for today. Thanks. Bye.
If your answer isn't Wind Waker, you're wrong.